Let's have a look at some of the major tools for adjusting color casts inside of Resolve. Let's switch over to clip 8, and I'm just going to middle click on one of our other shots we've been playing with just to load our color transform. Again, and our gamma is Blackmagic Design Film Gen 5. Output color space is Rec 709. Gamma is Rec 709. And our gamut mapping should be under saturation compression. And let's close our clips and our gallery so we can see what's going on. So here we have what looks to be a pretty neutral image as far as color casts go. The reason I think that is, one, just kind of by looking by eye, nothing seems unnatural or overly warm, cool, pink, or green. And I can also look in my vector scope here, and our little cloud here is pretty close to the middle. If there is any color cast, it might be towards the yellowish red side of things, but I don't think that's necessarily true just because we have a lot of foliage here, which tends to fall in the kind of yellowish realm. That doesn't necessarily mean there's a color cast, that just means that there are a lot of things that are that color in the frame. So how do we adjust a color cast in Resolve? Well, there are a few different ways. One, probably the most basic way, is to grab your offset here, and you can move your color wheel around, and that will push a certain color tone into your whole image. So if we take this offset and kind of push it to the upper left, that's going to push this sort of orangish tone into everything. And now we have what we call a warm wash. A wash is just a bunch of color that kind of goes over everything. And you want to be really careful with an adjustment like this because it doesn't really look natural. It looks like you color graded it. And that's usually not what you want people to think. It's like, oh, wow, you color graded your movie. You usually want it to just subtly influence how somebody feels about the shot without being distracting. But that is a way you can move things around. Upper left is warm, upper right is kind of pink, lower left is greenish, and the lower right is kind of bluish cyan. But we can see a little bit goes a long way here. In fact, look how little I move this offset and how much it changes the vector scope. It really makes a big difference. In fact, without pushing this too far, I can have just about every color here in our shot down here in the lower right quadrant, which means that everything's blue. So that's a way to do it. Definitely use it sparingly. Another way that will look a little bit more natural is by using the gain. The gain is only going to affect the brightest colors, so this is a nice way to adjust something that should be white that isn't white, or to push a certain color into the image without completely giving it a wash. Doing this in the gamma can get you in trouble, because if you push the gamma a little warm, at first glance, it looks a little bit more subtle, but you'll still have things that should be white that won't feel like they kind of fit in the scene. And if you're going to do something like adjust white balance, pushing around the gamma is not a great way to do it. This might be a good way to add a little bit of tone to your image, a little bit of character, if you kind of want it to subtly feel warmer or cooler, but again, a little goes a long way. Next is the lift. The lift is only going to affect the darkest parts of the image, and a lot of the time, I use the color wheel for the lift to either stylize the image and kind of give it these cooler shadows, or to balance the shadows if they aren't neutral. Let's take a look at a different example. Here on shot 3, we have the kids on their bikes, and I'll just scrub through this. Again, I have my color transform loaded here. And in the first node, if I look at this white shirt on the parade, we'll see that it's living right here where these spikes are. And our red spikes are a little bit taller than our green and blue spikes, which means that this is cast just a little bit warm. Now, this might not be a problem. This is kind of at sunset, so it might be totally fine. In fact, I would probably leave this. But if we did want to correct this, one way that we can adjust that white balance is with the gain. So I can grab this gain color wheel, and as I move it around, we can look down here at the scopes, and we can see them bounce around. So I can move my gain around until the peaks of the green, blue, and red scopes line up, and they are kind of at the same height. Pretty subtle adjustment. Here's before, and here's after. We're really kind of just cooling this down a little bit. Now, color casts are going to be a lot easier to see if they're saturated a little more. So sometimes what I like to do is push the saturation just a touch, just temporarily, and even oversaturate it a little, just so that we kind of exaggerate the differences between the red, green, and blue scopes here. And we're actually getting a pretty good match, I would say. And it's kind of tricky to make these subtle adjustments with the mouse. That's when it comes in really handy to have a surface. So I can move just a little bit on my wheel, and I can get really, really fine controls on my scopes. So now I'll take my saturation down, and now we have just a little bit more balance to this white on his shirt. Again, I don't think the warmth in this shot is much of a problem, so we wouldn't necessarily do that, but that's how you do it. Let's go down to shot 71. I'll middle button mouse click on one of our other shots just to quickly load our color transform. And now in this first node, we can take a look at our door. This door is almost certainly supposed to be white. If we look in the scopes here, we can see it's actually tinted a little bit blue. This is a great use for the scopes because it's really kind of hard to tell visually, but this does have quite a bit of blue tones in it. So again, I can just take the gain here and move this ball around so that that door is roughly equal between the red, green, and blue channels, which means that it is neutralized. So here's before and here's after. The other part with fixing something like white balance is you want to balance your shadows. So something like this black should also be balanced. And right now, the very bottom of this is the blue and the green are a little bit higher than the red. And so we can, again, take the darkest parts here with the lift and subtly move it so that these little spikes are all equal. And generally, if you have your highlights balanced and your shadows balanced, everything else will pretty much fall into place and look natural. So this is where we were, and this is where we are now. Again, this color cast might not be something we have to take out. It might work for the story. That's something you'd have to decide for yourself and whether it works for the overall feeling that we're going for. But this is a great way to practice fixing white balance because it works the exact same way. We go from this kind of subtle blue feeling to a little bit warmer. The other way we can adjust color cast is with the temperature and tint controls in our primaries. Temperature is a lot like taking your offset and moving it from warm to cool. And tint is kind of the other way, green to magenta. And we can do a really similar thing here. Let's go back to where our door is closed. And we can move this temperature slider so that the red and blue are relatively the same. And then mix those both with the green one with the tint slider. Something like that. And the advantage here is that it's also going to do a little bit of work in our shadows. Now our shadows are a little bit blue, so if we don't like that, we might need to do a little bit more work with the gain and the lift. But the temperature and tint controls are a little bit simpler way to kind of do the same thing. Another really cool way you can adjust color casts and kind of set your white balance is with these little crosshairs right here for the gain and the lift. And this kind of automates the process that we did before of balancing the scopes with the gain and the lift. All we have to do is click on this and we have a little color picker here. And we want to pick something that's supposed to be white, but isn't way too bright. So maybe this little highlight on this door, we can pick that. And then I'll take the lift and we'll pick kind of the darkest part of the shot that's supposed to be neutral. And we can click that. Now, what's going to happen when we do this is it's going to set the color cast and it's also going to set the brightness for the gain and the lift, which we might not want. And in fact, it usually sets it to something you don't want because what it's really trying to do is whatever you click, it's going to make it perfect white. That means it's going to be all the way bright and it's going to be neutral. Same thing for the darkest parts here. It's going to be all the way dark and neutral. And so what I'll often do is keep the color cast that it gives me, but then adjust the master wheel here between the gain and the lift to get to where I actually want it to be. And there we have a pretty good adjustment that Resolve kind of really helped us out with. So if that's easier for you, that is an option. Now on a surface, these trackballs correspond to the color wheels for the gain, gamma, and the lift. And we can reset that by hitting RGB on either of these. But if we go into offset, this right one becomes the offset color wheel, and the rings on the middle and the left become our temperature controls and our tint controls. So that's another advantage of having a surface, is having that really fine control for any kind of color cast you want to introduce or remove. Those are the ins and outs of adjusting color casts in the color page.